If you're humble and you know it, clap your hands. Wait, am I allowed to clap there? Are we ever allowed to acknowledge humility in our own lives? So you probably grew up just like I did, where humility looked like looking down on yourself, like demeaning yourself. But in Romans 12:3 it says, not to think more highly of yourself than you ought to, rather as to think with sound judgment, according to the measure of faith that God has given you. C.S. Lewis says really simply that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Do not imagine that if you meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble. He will not be the sort of greasy, smarmy person who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody. Probably all you will think about him is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said. And I find that to be so true. The most humble people I know are not necessarily those who think less of themselves, but always seem to be engaged with me as I'm conversing with them. In Philippians 2, we get the craziest picture of humility in that it says, although Jesus existed in the form of God, he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, something to be held on to, but he emptied himself, becoming like a bondservant and taking on the likeness of man. So humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but willingly lowering yourself for the sake of others. Philippians 2 says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. So when we're making decisions, we think through how do our actions benefit those around us, more than we think how do our actions benefit ourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. So yeah, we have needs and we have to take care of ourselves, but we also have to be mindful of the people around us. And we find this example in Jesus in that he was equal with God, but didn't consider it something to hold on to, something to be grasped. Instead, he emptied himself, became a servant, and took the form of humankind. And because he humbled himself, God exalted him. But here's what I don't want to happen. Next time you lead worship or lead a Bible study or do anything and someone comes to you and gives you a compliment, don't say, it was all God. Because usually when it's all God, it's better than just a good message or a good worship set. Because to me, when it's all God, 5,000 people are fed, the masses are healed, and it seems to be a bigger deal than just a good sermon. So yes, you have a part in God's work in you, and be grateful for God working through you. And try not to think more of yourself or less of yourself, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith given to you by God. In making this, I'm literally thinking to myself, how can I speak on humility? Because there are many times that I'm constantly thinking about myself and not living up to this discussion of humility here. And yet I have to think about myself and say, okay, God has been at work in my life. I need sober judgment. He has given me a measure of faith, and I believe that by his Spirit, he is at work in my life. So there's gotta be a measure of humility in there. And even if we're not perfectly humble, we have to have a space where we can acknowledge that I am growing in humility. And I suppose it's not the kind of thing that you arrive at, and it's definitely the kind of thing that's easier to recognize within yourself in hindsight. But my concern is that in our pursuit of humility, that we don't run into this place where we are destroying ourselves with our words, or thinking of ourselves in destructive ways. So let's think about ourselves with sober judgment. How does God see us? This is probably one of the coolest activities I've done. This might seem counterintuitive, but write down 30 things that you believe God loves about you. Because if God's truth is the ultimate truth, get sober judgment about the truth about yourself. Get an accurate view of yourself, not a diminished one. I want to really encourage you to write those 30 things that God loves about you. Thanks again. I would love for you to like the page, subscribe on YouTube, comment, or share this video. Thank you very much.